Thank you once again for your time and your attention. In this video, we're going to be talking about water, access, and structures. It's important to also look outside your property and check out a few other things, which we're going to cover in this video. And I'm going to share a story with you when things do go wrong, how wrong they can go. So let's jump over here. I'll share my screen. Okay, so I've actually picked, this is the first property I ever took off grid in an urban environment. It's actually good to go back and when I did this, I didn't have all access to software tools and some fun stuff. I spent a lot of time learning about nature when I did this one. So we spent a lot of time observing. I spent a whole year watching how the sun works, how it operates, all the shading and things like that on the property. But these days, with these sort of tools you can put in, you can see all the shading and everything like that, which is great. So look, one of the real things that I highly recommend when you're first looking, if you're looking at buying a block of land or even the current land you've got, is actually look at your boundaries. Now, we've got a customer, and this is the story I was going to share. They actually purchased a block of land, neighbor next door. They built the house. Everything was great, hunky-dory. And then to one day, something come up and they needed to get their property surveyed. Now they got their property surveyed, and what happened, they actually found out that the neighbor's house was on their property. Literally the whole house was built on their property. And this is a rural property in the middle of nowhere. We've also had a customer down in Tasmania who built their house and they did the opposite way around, built it over a paper road, which basically went through. Now, one of them still going through court. The one where it was actually built over a paper road, and it was actually an amazing earthship. So you know how much labor and work goes into building an earthship. If you don't know what an earthship is, go and Google it. They're pretty cool. They're the houses they make out of tires mainly, or designed to get inside of a hill. They're really thermal efficient from a temperature regulation point of view. The earthship was actually built across a paper road, which went through, which was actually the access point to the property at the back. And yeah, so the neighbor who bought the property said, hey, you need to move your house. And the customer said, well, no, hang on. Here's the plans from council. This is what they approved. They told me I could put the house there. So it's your problem now, not mine. And lucky that for our customer, that's actually what happened to become the neighbor's problem, because council had approved the house and everything to be built on that bit of land there. So something to think about, and sometimes why it is important to get council to check on that sort of stuff when you're building dwellings. Now, give an example of this property here, some things. So yeah, with a lot of this software these days, it's really easy. You don't really need a surveyor to come out to site. About 3 or 4 years ago, the Australian government had all of Australia LiDAR'd. So which basically is a plane that flies over and shoots radars down to the ground. And they measured all the contour layers and basically measured everyone's boundaries pretty much. One of the problems there is with planes, with pictures and satellite images and things like that, it all depends on which way the camera was facing when it took the photo to the satellite image. But as an example, this image here is likely to be 99.9% correct. But when it comes to laying those images over, so what we see in the real world with the data and what was taken on the plane, it might not look right and things might look out of whack. Now, yeah, so start and get your boundary done and make sure that you own what you own. And sometimes you might end up with some free land, you never know. Or if you're going to build something, you know where you can build it. So I highly recommend doing that. And like I said, we have access to a software program here that does it pretty quickly. That can do it really fast and low cost compared to having a surveyor come out to site and survey it. At the end of the day, if you want the most accurate 100%, you know, this is what it is, I'd highly recommend. If you're looking to build something and it's going to be a bit borderline, or it could be neighbors or not, I'd highly recommend get a surveyor to come out and do it and not really trust the software programs at that point of view. But they're a really good start to make sure that most of what you've got is yours. And when you're buying a property, see whether you get any free houses when they come with them. And you can kick your neighbor out or charge them rent. So yeah, it's important to understand your boundaries. Now with that, though, what I want to cover of understanding your boundaries, the next thing is water. Now, whether you already have a property there or you don't, I want to use this property as a really good example. We use some great features of this property. And as you can see, these trees here, they're actually in a raised garden bed. I'll click over this image here. We can't really see it. These trees are all up here in a raised garden bed. And basically, yeah, so it's a 1.5 meter wall or something like that. And a big concrete patch. As you can see the trees there. They're actually deciduous. So with those trees there in summer, they help shade the house, and in winter, help heat the place up. And we jump back over here. What we did when we designed this, and we actually used the neighbor's runoff here, so we've got this big concrete patch. There's something to think about whether you're trying to water plants, and that's what our intention was here, is how do we get that water to run off into here and water plants. Now, we didn't capture all of it, and a lot of it we actually sent down the middle here, and it actually ended up watering all this patch here, and we took that water from the neighbors all the way down off their driveway, the way the builder had done their driveway, it all come into ours anyway. We'd actually put some little mini swales in there to divert the water and direct it. So that water flowed all the way down here from the front of our property and all the way down the back. And we actually had like a 7 meter hedge down there That was a great because it actually gave us a lot of privacy. Our house was actually higher than the neighbor's house over here. We were quite lucky. We were above everyone else and looked down on everyone else, so people couldn't see in our backyard. You might be building a townhouse complex in the middle of Brisbane or something like that. It's something really important to look around your property or uphill to see where the water's coming from, because you could build this big, beautiful, amazing house, not consider the water from the property next door. Now, I'll give you another project we've been looking at, this one here. As you can see, this property here, the dam, I'll actually put the contours on so you can see the contours. As you can see, this property here, it's quite flat. And the dam water over here for the main dam for the site's over here. So where does the water actually come from this property? It's actually coming from the neighbor's property, the neighbor's boundary. So when you're rural and off-grid, that's something really important to think about, of where that catchment area is coming down here. And this is great for these people here, is because this property, it's all bushfire, conservation land, is never going to get chopped up and chewed up, and nothing's ever going to go there. So that's going to be their catchment area for rain to keep filling their dam up over time. Now, in an urban environment, it's the same thing to think about, of where that water is going to come and is it going to cause you any issues in the future. We can put the contour maps on here. As you can see with this property here, everything sort of falls down towards the back, and it's about how you can use that water. Now, with this property here, when we put this big concrete area in this house here, we had a few issues of getting everything right once it was in. Things weren't so smooth sailing, because what happened is when we did it all, when they did all the work and did all the drainage, there was a lot of things that were done that actually blocked the drainage up. So it kept filling up and flooding the garage, which is just under here, the side of the house. So we had to get it all unblocked and dealt with. So then the drainage for this here actually ran out of this footpath and it came into our back garden. And we actually had some swales around here, some raised garden beds. So it was a tiered backyard. We used to divert that water around there. So we actually used it for watering our plants and things like that. And we tried to keep as much of that water on our property as possible. But what would happen? The drain wasn't actually big enough. It would overflow. And we were lucky enough, once we got it finished and fixed, that the water would just actually overflow down here. It was a thing that I'd planned on this property here, is to actually put bamboo down the side of this house here, because this house here, it really got hammered from that western afternoon sun shining over here and heating up this side of the house. And the reason I like using bamboo in situations like that, it's really easy to manage, because you can just cut off at the bottom and you can pull it down. Compared to managing trees, bamboo can be a lot easier to handle and deal with when it comes to using it for external shading devices to help cool the house down. So we would have used that runoff water down there to water. I actually did have 1 or 2 bamboo plants in there before I left. I don't know whether they survived or got looked after. Depending on this image, this is not when I owned it. They've really hammered the hedges. We had the hedges up quite tall. We had a big concrete post there that looks like it's been removed. And we had these hedges up actually quite tall on our place to cover the front. We actually had deciduous plants there that would grow up and a bit of bamboo, so we can actually control that heat coming in from the house. Now, we're going to use a rural property for this example because it's a bit more extreme, and I think to really show you and understand the concept. Now, with most urban environments, when we build things, we build driveways and things like that, we just concrete. It's quite simple. It's done and dusted, and it's dealt with. Now, when it comes to putting access in on a rural property, and this is why I'm going to use this a bit more of extreme, and well, this property here is actually a really amazing example. Now, access can be one of those things that literally, I went to a place on the weekend down the back of Taree in the mid-north coast, and it was actually a dry-only access. Now, do you want that to be your property so that literally when you're there, if it rains, you're stuck and you can't get out? So there's a lot of properties like that, and especially remote and off-grid, and something to think about. And the way you build your driveway, the access to the property and the access to the dwellings can really cost you a lot of money over time on maintenance. Now, for example, if you do a driveway straight up and straight down a hill, it's likely going to be one of those products that over time, when it rains and things like that, it's going to get chopped up. It's going to cost you a lot of money to maintain over the years. Now, sometimes some of the properties, that's all you've got is a straight up and straight down. And if that's your dream property, that's what you want to do with, hey, great. Or you could run a big bit of concrete up there or tar it, and that's just going to be a cost over time using bitumen. Now, this property here, we've just put a little bit of concrete here as an example. This program that we use can actually measure concrete and quantities and things like that. So if it's something you really want to say, hey, Mike, if I want to concrete all this, what's it going to cost me? We can actually use the program to measure things out and work out a cost. And if you're looking to buy a property and access is not so good, you can put this in here and you can work out a feasibility study and say, hey, is it worth buying this property? Because I'm going to have to spend this much amount of money on concrete in that property to buy it. And if you've already got existing property and you're thinking about doing something, we can help you to do the same there. If you look at this property here, and the key to this, guys, and what they've actually used, they've actually just used, the dirt, the soil that's there. They've compacted a bit of hard pack over the top. But what's made this property really successful over the years, and what's actually made the driveway, we'll call it, last, is because everything's on contour. As you can see, all the access to all the buildings, we'll actually put the contour maps on here so you can actually see. As you can see, as much as possible, the driveway come down and it worked on contour. So it come across here, and we got a little bit that's not on contour, and then we come back on contour. They've used the fall land as much as possible, and that's what you want to do. And you see a lot of driveways rural, you see big, long driveways that go up and down because they're really short periods of patches that sort of go around the corner, up the contour, against the contour, when everything else as much as possible is on contour. And that's really going to help you with all your water runoff and things like that. The other thing that they've actually done with this property here is, as you can see, they've used swales. And as you can see, all the big growth is right on the bottom side of the driveway. So there's a lot of swales there. So if the hard runoff from the water goes into the swales, it'll get held in those swales and actually will slow that water up, slowly soak into the ground, water all those trees, and create a bit of an ecosystem there. Over time, it's really going to help that driveway become a low maintenance driveway because we've got the trees there to protect it from wind and things like that. The trees will also soak up moisture really, really fast out of the soil. So it's actually soaking the moisture up. We're not using that hard sun to really dry it out and make it really hard and compact, which can also give you another issue as well once there's been a rain event and people have been driving through it. And one of the other things that you can really do when because it all comes down to which way the water is going to flow across your property, you can use the access. So you can use that access to sort of divert and flow water in certain ways that you want it. Once you've understand where the water is going to flow across your property, where you're going to access the property, then you can start thinking about, okay, where can I put my structure is going to really be the best place for me on this property. Now, this property here, as an example, it's a MO, which is a multiple occupancy, which means it's owned by a business. And there's 8 shareholders and they all own a certain amount of land themselves, and they have common areas which they share. Now, we're working on a few of these projects at the moment. This might be something a bit out of scope as probably what you might be thinking of, or you might have a block of land that you want to turn into an MO. If that's something you can do, hey, reach out, something we can help you out with. And let's now talk about the structures, and we'll continue to use this property. I'll get rid of those contour lines. So we now start looking at the structures. And this is probably a good example of something to think about. I know it's more of a larger scale, but it can help give you an idea about when you're building your own little property, what you want to do. Now, if we had to do this property over again, there'd be very few little things that I would change. One of the biggest things for me that I would want to get involved in more of is the electrical work and the design of the power system, where we could have shared resources when it comes to energy on the network. And we could have created more of a microgrid in the system, which sometimes can be really great, but also it's one of those things with power. If you have a shared 8 people on the one power system, people can tend to use more than others, and everyone seems to have blackouts and things like that. Now, if I had to do this property again, the few little things that I'd want to do working for this property would be maybe better management of the power systems and how it works here, things like that. But besides that, this property is really well designed from the water, the access, and the structures of how they did. So what they actually did is they actually put one big shed at the top here, which is a common shed that everyone owns as a part of the community. It's a shed to store materials and things like that. So literally, think about it from an ease of access point of view. Trucks come in here in the front gate. This is a front gate right out here. Everything's delivered right to this front building. We don't have trucks and everything driving all over the property and things like that. Sometimes some of the shareholders have big packages they want delivered down to their products, and the truck's going to go there for some time. It's just more about that. It limits the amount of trucks and traffic driving over the property all the time by having that shared structure up top. Now, in the middle of the property here, technically, this is in the middle. This is the commons area, so it's a shared community area. It's a big core room and a common area. Like, think about it like, if they actually use this for teaching resources, this property, but you could use it if this is something that you're looking for here. It's put there. They're not actually affecting or going through anyone else's property. So something to think about like that there on a bit more of a larger scale. Now, in an urban environment, just think about like this here. I like this townhouse here. That if you're designing some townhouses and stuff like that, how can you make the access as private as possible, not to distract the other people and things like that, and how to make it as safe as possible. Now, this one's actually really interesting how they did this one here. This is a lot higher and actually put a lot of cut in here. And so literally the second story of this building is like the same height as the first story of this one. And this driveway here sort of goes on a bit more of a ramp, which is interesting, which has really helped create a bit of privacy in the backyard here for these tenants and things like that in there. It's important to think about over time is how the access to that property is going to be used for, and is it going to be annoying to one of the people there that's literally going to make them want to sell the house all the time because people keep driving through their properties and things like that. So something to take in consideration when you're doing the access to the property and where you're going to place your structures. And we just covered some basics of your water, your access, and your structures, and actually you can see how they all work. One of the final things I want to add into structures is to have a think about, and the way I would normally do this when I'm running a process, I would normally do my water access structures. And the last one to think about with the structure is, say, for example, you want to power it 100% from renewable energy, where you're going to put the solar panels. Now, some of these places here, as you can see, there's solar everywhere. There's different power stations, different houses. They're not connected. It was hard to dig a trench and get power to there, so we couldn't really share it. So what I would normally do is think about, okay, once I've done my water access structures, where am I going to put my power system? Am I going to have that shared power system? And sometimes I might go back once I've done everything again to go back to the start and just follow, okay, where's the water going to flow after this here? How's the access all going to work for everyone involved if we put the power system up there, or for cars driving and things like that? Or how's a vehicle going to get through the property in a rain event? And is that the best place for a structure where we can use that structure and maybe put solar or things like that on top of the roof? So it's something to think about. And sometimes you might do this 4 or 5 times. You've gone through and think about it every single time. And then you might show this to a professional and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And they go, oh, did you think about that? So these things happen. I really reckon the more times you think about it, the more scenarios that you run, what's going to happen. And sometimes you might have done all the planning possible and you might get to start doing it. When you're doing the implementation, things can come up that maybe might want to change or be better for the design to move something somewhere else. You know, as an example, you might come up with a whole heap of rock that you can't move that you might have planned to put an access or a structure or something over the top of it, and that's just not going to work. So it's important as well to be flexible. And maybe if you've done 3 or 4 or 5 plans, if something like that does come up, you can come back to one of your other plans and go, okay, cool. How about we just go back and we do it this way because we can't put it through that property there. So it's about having a few different options, being flexible. And I think the most important thing to do is have a plan. Have a plan, whether you've bought the property, you're planning on buying the property. Sometimes running these plans before you buy a property can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars by looking and understanding this information before you go out and purchase the property. You might find out some stuff that you were dreaming and wanted to, you just can't do because of certain things in the land. I'll show you an example of my place in Seven Hills. I'll take this contour maps off. You can't really see it. But you can actually just see here, so you can see that's actually the sewer line that runs through there. And this is potentially a big thing to say, no, you can't do what you want to do, Mike. And it's just putting up a garden shed. I'll actually just show you this image here because this is a better image. As you can see, that's my garden shed. And we wanted to concrete, put that down there. And the real challenge here, because that pipe runs straight, it runs right in front of where I want to put the concrete slab. That could have been if that pipe was back a little bit further. And it was one of those things for me. It just worked out for me because we already owned the house and I just wanted to do it and make it happen. It could have been one of those things though, that really the hard no come, we couldn't do it because there was a sewer line there and we couldn't actually concrete over it. Now, it's one of those things to think about, that if you're purchasing a block of land, you actually have the option to see that sort of stuff. It won't show anything like that because most rural properties don't have their own septic or sewer lines or phone lines or things like that. It's up to you to enter them and put them in. As you can see in this urban environment, we've got the sewer line running through there. It's something important to think about and take into consideration that we can't build over on the top of it. Or if you do build over the top, there's going to be required an access point. So if something does happen in the future, that the council can access to that product. So remember the 3 things: your water, your access, your structures. Make sure your boundaries are your boundaries. Have a look outside. What other things are going to affect the property, the build, from water coming from other places, or maybe even shading from different buildings? What shading, if you want to go with a whole full renewable design, do this in town, what shading issues you're going to have. And like I said, these programs these days actually have the tools to create shadows that cast them off, and you can see them at every time of the year what shadow issues you're going to have. In the ACT in Australia right now, there's actually a new law that's been brought out that there must be one window of a house that has sunshine in it all day long. It can't be shaded. So a lot of these tools are getting created and built on the fly because those sort of laws and rules and regulations are coming out, that when a designer builds a new house in the ACT now, there has to be one window that is not shaded at all times of the day. So something to think about. And we hope with our knowledge and experience, we can help hold your hand on the way through to make sure you make as little mistakes as possible to make your going off grid journey as smooth as possible. Thanks guys, and I'll see you in the next video.